Can you imagine standing in your own father's doorway on Christmas night, watching him throw your 8-year-old daughter out into the snow? What if I told you that less than 5 minutes later, that same man, along with the rest of your family, was on his knees begging you to stay? Because that's exactly what happened. Hey everyone, my name's Annie, and that Christmas night, it broke me, and then it rebuilt me, stronger than I ever thought possible. If you've ever been the black sheep, the family embarrassment, or felt like you had to fight for your child's place at the table, stay with me. This story is for you. You see, the drive out to my parents' farm always took about an hour. Just long enough for Lily, my daughter, to ask every single question about Christmas trees she'd ever stored up. That year, she was 8, a wrapped gift for her grandpa on her lap, practically bouncing in the back seat. "Mommy, is the big spruce by the barn still crooked?" she'd ask, eyes wide with magic. To her, the farm, with its generations of trees and pine-scented air, was pure wonder. To me, lately, it was a place I had to brace myself for. I'm not going to lie, I thought about not going. So many times that week, my thumb hovered over my phone, ready to text my mother that we'd be skipping Christmas dinner. But Lily had been counting down the days. And honestly, I had a very specific, very important folder in my bag that, one way or another, I needed to deal with before the new year. So, I put on my nice sweater, helped Lily into her good red coat, and drove us straight towards a Christmas dinner I already knew might just break us. A mother learns to walk into rooms like that. You just make damn sure you can walk back out. It's important you understand who I am. I'm a certified public accountant. Nothing glamorous, just me and one part-timer, doing taxes and books for farmers and local shops. It pays the rent on our 2-bedroom apartment, keeps Lily in soccer cleats, and I built it myself from nothing. That's the part I'm fiercely proud of. Lily's father left when she was barely walking. Decided fatherhood wasn't for him. I stopped chasing child support I was never going to see and just got to work. I'm not bitter. Some of the best things in my life came out of the worst year of it. But in my family, a single mother is, well, it's a permanent apology. My parents go to a church where everyone knows everyone. A daughter with a child and no husband was, to them, a stain they had to constantly explain away at coffee hour. My older sister, Brooke, she did it the right way. Married a man with a good job, 2 perfect kids, a house with a wreath on every window. Brooke was proof they'd done it right. I was the cautionary tale. I'd made my peace with most of that. But what I hadn't made peace with was the year the farm almost went under and what it cost me to save it. And the fact that I'd never told a living soul. That's the part of the story they didn't know I was carrying, that heavy secret, when they opened the door and started pushing my daughter out into the snow. The favoritism, it wasn't subtle. And with grandkids in the picture, it had only gotten worse. Brooke's kids got the big presents, the proud Facebook posts. Lily, she got a card, sometimes, signed by my mother in her neat, church lady handwriting. At family dinners, Brooke was at my father's right hand while I sat wherever was left over. When Brooke spoke, the table listened. When I spoke, my mother suddenly needed to check the roles. I'd learned to laugh about it, mostly. But that fall, something had shifted, and it centered on the farm. My grandfather, Pop, passed 4 years back. The land went to my father. Lately, though, Brooke had started saying things. Little things. "Someone's going to have to take this place over someday," she'd murmur, looking around the farmhouse like she was measuring it for curtains. "Someone with a real family," she'd add, with that sugary sweet voice, but her eyes would always flick to me when she said real. I never took the bait. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was staking her claim, planting a flag in the only thing our family had that was truly valuable. She wanted everyone to understand that the farm would go to the respectable daughter, not the embarrassment. None of them had any idea that the farm wasn't really my father's to give away anymore. Not free and clear. Not since that year it almost died. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That night, all Brooke knew was she was winning. All I knew was I had to get through one dinner. The warning signs were there, even before we left. 2 days before Christmas, Brooke texted me out of nowhere. "Hope Lily behaves this year. Last time was a lot. Last time, Lily had been 7 and knocked over a glass of cider. That was the extent of her crime." I read the text twice, set the phone down, and just breathed. Then my mother called to confirm, her voice clipped and cool. A sure sign she'd been talking about me with Brooke. She asked if I was bringing anyone, her annual way of reminding me I had no one to bring. I almost said it then. I almost told her we'd stay home. But here's the thing about being the daughter who carries everything. You get very good at telling yourself it'll be fine. And I had a real reason to go beyond Lily's joy. That folder in my bag. The farm's operating loan came up for renewal every year at the end of December. The bank needed a signature by the 31st. And that signature, it was mine. I'd planned to handle it quietly, after dinner, the way I handled everything. Slip the paperwork to my father in his office, where no one would see, so he could keep believing the bank just liked him. So I had 2 reasons to drive out there, my daughter's happiness and my father's pride. Both of them, as usual, mine to protect. I loaded the car. I told myself it would be fine. It is truly amazing, the things we tell ourselves, right up until the door opens. The farm at Christmas. It could break your heart with its beauty. We came up the long gravel lane in the dark, and the whole place glowed. Rows of trees strung with white lights, the old barn lit up gold, smoke curling from the farmhouse chimney into the falling snow. Lily had her face pressed to the window before I even parked. "There's the crooked one," she shouted, pointing at the big spruce. She was out of her seatbelt, and across the yard the second I cut the engine. My father was on the porch with a mug of something. And for one moment, one real, perfect moment, the picture was flawless. Lily threw her arms around his waist, he patted her shoulder, and I let myself hope, the way I always did, that this year would be different. I carried in the casserole I'd made, the gifts, and that folder, zipped safe in my bag. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and roasting turkey. My mother was at the stove. Brooke and her husband, Mark, were on the couch with their kids. Pop's old farm photos still lined the hallway. For about 20 minutes, it was almost a family. Lily showed her grandfather the drawing she'd made him. I even helped my mother with the gravy, and she let me, which felt like a gift in itself. I should have known better than to relax. In my family, the warmest part of the evening was always just the quiet before somebody decided the night needed a villain. And they'd already decided who. It started the way it always did, with my father and the bottle. Gordon Ulley was a hard man, sober, and a harder one 3 whiskeys in. By the time we sat down to eat, he was well past 3. Brooke got it going. She always did, with that sweet, innocent smile that made it impossible to object without looking like you were making a scene. "So, Annie," she chirped, passing the potatoes. "How's the single life? Still doing other people's taxes?" A little laugh. "I don't know how you do it all alone. I'd just die." Mark stared at his plate. My mother said nothing, which in my family was a kind of agreement. I kept my voice light, for Lily's sake, sitting right there beside me with her napkin tucked into her collar. "It keeps the lights on," I said. "Lily and I do all right." "I'm sure you do," Brooke replied, in that tone that meant the exact opposite. My father snorted into his glass. I let it go. I'd gotten good at letting it go, swallowing the small cruelties so the night wouldn't tip over, so Lily could have her grandfather's Christmas trees. But I could feel the evening leaning, the way a tree leans before it comes crashing down, that slow groan before the crack. I put my hand on Lily's, knee under the table. A small, silent signal between us that meant, we're okay. We're fine. I didn't know yet just how far this family would go. I just knew I needed to get that paperwork signed and get my daughter home before the leaning turned into a fall. I made one mistake that night, and it was small. Between the turkey and the pie, I leaned toward my father and said quietly, just to him, "Dad, when you get a minute, I've got those bank papers in my bag. The year-end ones. We should take care of them before I head out." I'd meant it kindly. I'd meant to do it in his office, away from everyone. But the whiskey had made his ears sharp for anything that sounded like a challenge to his standing. And the word bank, said at his own table, hit him like an insult. "We don't talk money at Christmas dinner," he snapped, too loud, and the table went quiet. Brooke's eyebrows shot up, delighted. "What bank papers?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "It can wait." "Sounds like something," Brooke insisted. My father waved his glass. "Your sister thinks she's the accountant for this whole family," he slurred. There was a genuine meanness in it now, the whiskey talking. Always got her papers. Always got her opinions. My face went hot. I'd spent 2 years protecting this man's pride about those exact papers. And here he was, using them to make me small in front of everyone. I should have just left it, but I was tired, in a way I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. The words came out before I could stop them. "Believe me, Dad," I said quietly. "You want me to have those papers." He didn't hear the warning in my voice. He heard sass, and his face started to change. I drove my daughter an hour to a Christmas dinner I already knew might hurt us, all because she wanted to see her grandfather's trees. If you've ever walked into a room for your kid's sake, knowing it might cost you something deep down, stay with me. Because this is where the real story lives. Those bank papers had a history. It started 2 years back, in the winter, when the farm almost died. It had been a brutal stretch. 2 warm Decembers in a row had decimated tree sales. Crucial equipment failed and needed replacing. My father, like a lot of proud men, had been papering over the trouble with short-term debt, and it had finally caught up to him. All at once, the bank that held the farm's operating loan, the line of credit that bought seedlings, made payroll, and kept the whole operation breathing, decided it had seen enough. They wouldn't renew. Not for him. His credit was wrecked. The farm's numbers were upside down. Without that operating line, the farm couldn't function. No money for spring planting. No way to make it to the next season. 3 generations of trees. My grandfather's life's work, about to be sold off in pieces to cover the debt. My father didn't tell the family. He told everyone the farm was having a slow year. That was the lie he could stand to say out loud. But behind it, he was drowning. And he was too proud to admit it. The bank had given him one way out. They'd renew the loan, they said, on one condition. He needed a guarantor, someone with strong enough credit to co-sign, to personally guarantee the debt. Someone the bank could trust, since they no longer trusted him. He didn't come to me first. I need you to know that, because it tells you everything about where I sat in that family. He went at Brooke and Mark first. Mark does well, sells commercial insurance, drives a truck that costs more than my car and my apartment combined. My father took Mark out to lunch, swallowed every bit of his pride, and asked them to co-sign the loan that would save the family farm. Mark said no. He dressed it up, of course. Said it was too much exposure. Said his financial advisor wouldn't like it. But the answer was a clear, hard no. Brooke backed him up, predictably. "We have the kids to think about," she'd said. "The respectable daughter. The real family. The ones who were going to inherit the place someday. They wouldn't risk a dime to save it." When Mark said no, my father, I found out later, sat in his truck in the restaurant parking lot for an hour, just staring into space. He'd run out of road. And so, finally, with absolutely nowhere else to turn, the man who'd spent my whole life treating me like an apology called his embarrassment of a daughter. I remember the call. I remember how small his voice was, how it cracked on the word help, a word I'd never once heard him say. "Annie," he'd whispered, "I'm in trouble." I didn't know who else to call. And God help me, I was so happy he called me that I almost cried. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the unwanted one. You'll forgive almost anything for one moment of being truly needed. I drove out to the farm the next morning. My father met me at the kitchen table with the bank's paperwork spread out and a look on his face I'd never seen before. Somewhere between desperate hope and searing shame. He explained it badly, the way proud men explain things they don't want to be explaining. The bank would renew the operating line if I co-signed and personally guaranteed it. That meant my credit, my name, my signature, on a debt that ran into 6 figures. If the farm failed, the bank could come after me. My savings, my apartment, everything I'd built for Lily. I knew exactly what I was signing. I'm an accountant. I read every line, and every line was a risk to the only security my daughter had. And then my father did something he had never, ever done in 34 years. He reached across the table and took my hand. And he said, "Please, I can't lose Pop's farm. I'll never forget this. I swear to you, Annie, I'll never forget what you're about to do for this family." I looked at his hand on mine. I thought about Pop, about the rows of trees, about Lily someday cutting her own Christmas tree from land her great-grandfather planted. And I signed all of it. I put my daughter's security on the line to save a farm for a family that was, even then, planning to leave it to my sister. I didn't do it for them. I did it for Pop and for Lily, and because when someone you love finally says please, you find out what you're made of. I just didn't know yet what they were made of. Here's the part one never told anyone. After I signed, I made my father a promise, and I made myself one. I told him no one ever had to know. Not Brooke, not Mark, not my mother. As far as the family was concerned, the bank had simply renewed the loan because the farm had a good year, because Gordon Ulley was a good businessman who'd weathered a storm. I built him that story, and I handed it to him whole. Because I knew that if Brooke ever found out the embarrassment had saved the farm, the real family who wouldn't lift a finger for it, it would humiliate him. And somehow I still cared about that. So I kept it quiet. Every December, when the loan came up for renewal, I'd quietly review the farm's numbers, and I'd sign the guarantee again, and I'd cover whatever small shortfalls there were out of my own account. And I'd say nothing. 2 years of it. Mark knew a little. He glimpsed paperwork once and gone pale, and he never brought it up, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging what he'd refused to do. But the family story stayed clean. My father got to be the man who saved the farm, and I got to be the woman who actually did, in silence, carrying a 6-figure risk on my back for a family that still sat me below the salt at Christmas. I was the choke point. Every year, that farm lived or died on whether I signed. And that December, the renewal was due by the 31st. And the unsigned papers were sitting in the bag at my feet while my father called me an embarrassment at his own table. Back at the table, the night was tipping over. My father had decided I'd embarrassed him with the bank talk, and the whiskey wanted somewhere to go. He started in on me. The old greatest hits. How I thought I was so smart. How I'd made my bed with Lily's father, and now wanted everyone to feel sorry for me. How Brooke had done things the right way. My mother nodded along. Brooke wore that small, satisfied smile, like the cat with the cream. And Lily, my Lily, sat there next to me, getting smaller and smaller, hearing her grandfather talk about her mother that way. Hearing words she didn't fully understand, but understood enough. Embarrassment. I kept my hand on her knee. I kept my voice level. I'd weathered these storms before. I knew they passed if you just rode them out quiet. But something was different that night, and it took me a minute to place it. It was Pop. I kept thinking about Pop, about a piece of paper folded in the inside pocket of my bag, right next to the loan documents. I'd brought it without quite knowing why. Maybe some part of me knew the night was going to need it, because 2 years of silence had bought this family exactly nothing in the way of kindness, and I was beginning, slowly, dangerously, to do the math on what my silence had actually purchased. Their comfort, their pride, their flimsy story, and not 1 ounce of decency toward my child. The leaning tree groaned, and then my father reached for the bottle again. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a hand reached for that folded letter. I need to tell you about that letter, because it's the reason I did what I did. When Pop died 4 years back, he left the farm to my father, free and clear, the way everyone expected. But he left me something, too. Not money. A letter. His lawyer handed it to me a week after the funeral. A single page in Pop's shaky hand, and I'd carried a copy of it folded in my bag ever since, the way some people carry a saint's medal. I'd reread it that very morning while I was pulling the loan papers from the old shoebox where I kept the farm's records. Pop wrote like he talked, plain and slow. He wrote that he'd watched this family his whole life, that he knew exactly who was loud and who was kind, who loved being right, and who just loved. And then he wrote the line I've never been able to forget. This land doesn't need the loudest Ulley. It needs the one who loves it more than they love being right. That's you, Annie, not them. When the day comes, do what's right by the trees, even if this family never does right by you. I'd read that line 100 times and always thought it was just an old man being sentimental about his favorite grandkid. Sitting at that table, with my father slurring the word embarrassment at me in front of my daughter, I finally understood it differently. Pop hadn't been sentimental. He'd been telling me something. He'd seen, even then, that one day this family would force a choice, and he wanted me to know which side of it I belonged on. The land needed the one who loved it more than being right. I had the letter in my bag. I had the unsigned papers in my bag. And I had a little girl beside me who did not deserve to learn on Christmas that the people who were supposed to love her best thought she was a stain. The tree was leaning hard now. I just needed one more push to know it was time to let it fall. Brooke gave me the push. She always overplayed it. That was her flaw. The same way silence was mine. Sensing the night going her way, She decided to plant her flag once and for all. "You know, Dad," she said, swirling her wine, loud enough for the whole table. "Mark and I have been talking about the future, the farm." She let it sit. "We think when the time comes, it should stay with people who can really take care of it. A stable home, 2 parents." She smiled at me, sugar on a knife. "You understand, Annie? It's not personal. It's just, this place needs a real family." There it was, the whole plan, said out loud at last. Brooke and Mark, the ones who'd refused to risk $1 to save the farm, claiming it as their inheritance, in front of everyone, while the woman who'd actually saved it sat there in silence. My father nodded along, pleased. "That's sensible," he said. My mother said, "Of course it should go to Brooke. Of course." I looked around that table at the 3 of them, divvying up a farm that would have been a vacant lot by now if not for my signature. And I felt the last of something old and patient inside me quietly burn out. Lily tugged my sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, "why does Aunt Brooke keep looking at you mean?" And that, more than anything they'd said about me, was the thing that did it. Because I could carry their cruelty toward me forever. I'd proven that. But my 8-year-old had just watched a room full of adults decide her mother didn't count, and she'd had to ask me why. There are some things you do not let a child carry. So, I decided right then to take it from her. I should have just gathered our coats then. I see that now. But I tried one more time to do it the calm way, the way I always did. "Brooke," I said evenly, "maybe we don't plan the whole inheritance in front of the kids." It was a reasonable thing to say. It was, I thought, a gentle thing. But my father took it as me challenging the order of his table, and the whiskey stood him halfway up out of his chair. "You don't get a say," he thundered, pointing a thick finger at me. "You hear me? You don't get a vote in this family. You never did." And then he looked at Lily, my Lily, with her napkin still tucked in her collar. And he said the thing I will never forgive, the thing that ended it. "No wonder the kid's the way she is, raised by a woman who couldn't even keep a man." The table went silent. Lily didn't fully understand it, but she understood his face and his finger. And the word "kid" said like a slur. Her chin started to tremble, and she looked up at me with eyes that were filling fast. Something in me went very cold and very clear. Not hot, raging anger. Cold. The way the air goes absolutely still right before a real snowstorm hits. I'd spent 2 years, and a 6-figure risk, and 1,000 swallowed insults keeping this family afloat and keeping the peace. And my father had just used all that peace to make my daughter cry on Christmas. I took the napkin gently out of Lily's collar. I wiped her eyes with it, and I said, in a voice so calm it scared even me, "Okay, we're done here." I stood up. I didn't slam anything. I didn't raise my voice. I just helped Lily down from her chair and started toward the hall where our coats were hung. "Where do you think you're going?" my father demanded. "I'm taking my daughter home," I said. "She doesn't have to sit here for this." "Neither do I." That should have been the end of it. A normal family would have let the embarrassment leave, maybe felt a flicker of shame, maybe not. But my father couldn't stand to be walked out on. Being left was, to a man like him, the one unforgivable thing, because it meant he wasn't in control of the room. So, as I knelt to zip Lily into her red coat, he followed us into the hall, his face purple, and he threw open the front door himself, letting the cold and the snow pour in. "Fine, get out, both of you," he shouted. Brooke called from the table, not even bothering to turn around. "Don't ever come back." And my mother, my own mother, said in the flat, final voice of a woman closing a ledger, "We're better off without you." I finished zipping Lily's coat. I made sure her hood was up. I took her mittened hand in mine. And I want you to understand, I felt strangely calm. Because they had just made my decision very, very simple. They'd shown me, in front of witnesses, exactly who they were, and exactly what they thought my daughter was worth. And I happened to be holding, in the bag on my shoulder, the one thing that could show them what they were worth. I stood up. I turned around in that open doorway and I stopped. My father had a choice that night, and he made it. So I made mine. Before you hear what I said in that doorway, tell me in the comments below, would you have stayed quiet for the sake of peace? Or would you have stood up for your kid, no matter the cost? Because for 34 years, I'd chosen peace. And peace had bought me a father shoving my child into the snow. I stood in the open doorway, the cold biting at my back, Lily's hand clutched in mine. And I looked at the 3 of them, my father, red and swaying, My sister, smug. My mother, folding her napkin like the matter was settled. They were already turning back to their pie. They thought it was over. They thought I'd cry in the car, the way I always had. Drive home, lick my wounds, and come crawling back by Easter, the way their embarrassment always did, grateful to be tolerated. And I realized that the cruelest thing I could do to people like that was not to scream. It was to be calm. To be the one steady voice in a room full of people who'd completely lost themselves. So I didn't yell. I didn't break. I kept my voice quiet and even, almost kind, the voice I use with Lily when she's scared. And I said, I won't argue with you. You've made yourselves clear. I paused. So, you won't have a problem with what I'm about to do. My father waved a dismissive hand. And what's that? He sneered. I reached into my bag and took out the folder. The one with the bank's loan papers. And I held it up so they could all see it. And the sneer on my father's face began, very slowly, to die. I didn't have to explain it to everyone. I only had to explain it to one person and let him explain it to the rest. I looked past my father, to Mark, still sitting at the table, his fork halfway to his mouth. Mark, who'd glimpsed the truth 2 years ago and buried it. Mark, I said, you want to tell them, or should I? Mark set his fork down very slowly. The color was draining from his face. Annie, he began, what are you? Tell them what's in this folder, Mark. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. So I said it myself, calmly, to the room. These are the renewal papers for the farm's operating loan. The line of credit that buys the seedlings, makes the payroll, and keeps this whole place alive. I let that settle. The bank renews it every year, but only with a guarantor. Somebody with good enough credit to personally back the debt. Dad's credit hasn't qualified in years. I looked at my father. You all think the bank renewed this loan because Dad had a good year? It didn't. It renewed because 2 years ago, when this farm was about to be auctioned off, somebody co-signed it and put their own name and their own savings on the line. The room was dead silent now. Even Brooke's smile had frozen. That somebody, I said, was me. And these papers are due by the 31st. They need my signature to renew. I let the folder fall open in my hand. And I haven't signed them yet. You could have heard the snow land outside. Mark put his face in his hands, because Mark understood first. Mark always understood the money first. Oh my God, he mumbled muffled. Gordon, she's the guarantor. She's been the guarantor. My mother looked between us, not following yet. What does that mean? She asked. What is he talking about? I answered her gently, because she was about to need gentle. It means, Mom, that without my signature on these papers by New Year's Eve, the bank calls the loan. The whole balance. And the farm can't pay it, because the farm hasn't been able to pay it. Not for 2 years. It means foreclosure. It means Pop's land gets sold off in pieces by the end of January. I watched it land on each of them in turn. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Brooke had gone white as the snow on the porch because Brooke had just spent the evening claiming an inheritance that was about to evaporate into thin air. And my father stood there in the open doorway he'd thrown wide to push us out. And I watched the whiskey drain out of his face and the truth pour in. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd been the one who took my hand and said, please, 2 years ago. He'd just spent 2 years pretending it hadn't happened, telling himself the bank simply liked him, so he could keep being the man who saved the farm instead of the man whose embarrassment of a daughter saved it for him. And now I was standing in his doorway, with the proof in my hand and his 8-year-old granddaughter crying in her red coat, and nowhere left to hide. The change in the room was almost funny if it hadn't been so sad. 5 minutes earlier, they couldn't get us out the door fast enough. Now, my mother was crossing the room toward me with her hands out, her voice gone soft and frantic. Annie, honey, come sit down. You're upset. We're all upset. It's Christmas. Let's talk about this. Honey, I hadn't been honey in years. Brooke stood up so fast her chair scraped. Okay, let's everybody just calm down, she said. The exact words people use when they are the ones who need to calm down. Annie, nobody meant any of that. Dad's had a few. You know how he gets. Funny how fast the embarrassment became, Annie, honey, the moment they understood what I was holding. I didn't move from the doorway. I kept Lily's hand in mine and the cold at my back, because the cold felt cleaner than that room. An hour ago, I said quietly, I was the embarrassment who didn't get a vote. 5 minutes ago, You told my daughter to get out and never come back. I looked at my mother. You said you were better off without me. I let that hang in the air. The bank disagrees. Mark made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. My father finally found his voice, and the first thing out of it, God help him, was anger. Because anger was the only feeling he knew how to lead with. You'd let the farm go, he said, his voice rising. You'd let Pop's farm die just to spite us? After everything this family what? I asked, still quiet, still calm. And he didn't have an end to that sentence either, because we both knew what this family had done. And it could all be summed up by the open door behind me and the little girl crying in her coat. I'll give my father this. He held on to his rage for about 30 more seconds. He drew himself up in that doorway, the patriarch, the third generation. And he roared at me the way he'd roared my whole life. This is my farm, my father's farm. You don't get to hold it over my head. You don't get to come into my house and threaten me. He slammed his hand against the doorframe, and snow shook loose from the eave above him. Lily flinched into my side, and I just looked at him, calm as still water, and I said the truest thing I had. I'm not holding anything over your head, Dad. You threw us out. I'm just leaving, like you asked. The paper's leaving with me is just what happens when you throw out the only person whose name keeps this place alive. And that was when it broke in him. The rage collapsed all at once, the way a dead tree finally goes, and what was underneath it was just fear. Naked. Shaking. Annie! His voice cracked. He took a step toward me, and then, in front of his wife and his favorite daughter and his son-in-law, my proud father put his hands together. Please, please, Annie. We'll lose everything. The farm, the house, all of it. It's all tied to that loan. Please don't do this. I'm begging you. 5 minutes. That's how long it took. From get out and never come back, to my father begging me on Christmas night in his own doorway. I'd waited 34 years to be needed by this man, and now that I had him, I felt no triumph at all. Just a great, quiet sadness, and a very clear sense of what I had to do next. I let him stand there a moment, his hands together, because some part of me, the part that was still 8 years old and waiting to be chosen, needed to see it. Then I reached into my bag and took out the other piece of paper, the folded one. Pop's letter. Before anybody says another word, I said, I want to read you something. Pop wrote it to me before he died. None of you have ever seen it. I unfolded it carefully. My father's begging face changed at the sight of his own father's handwriting. I read it out loud, in the steady voice I'd kept the whole night, so all of them heard it. This land doesn't need the loudest Ellie. It needs the one who loves it more than they love being right. That's you, Annie, not them. I looked up. Pop knew, I said. He knew exactly how this family treated me, and he knew exactly who'd show up when it mattered. He was right on both counts. My mother was crying now. Brooke was staring at the floor. I'm not going to let the farm die, I said, and I watched the relief start to break across my father's face, and I held up a hand to stop it. But not for you. For Pop, for the trees, for the version of this family that he believed could exist, even if I've never once seen it. I folded the letter back up. So, here's what's going to happen. And you're going to listen. Because for the first time in 34 years, the embarrassment is the one holding the pen. I stood in that doorway and I laid it out, calm and clear, the way I'd lay out a tax plan for a client who'd gotten themselves in trouble. I'll sign the renewal, I said. The farm will be safe. But the silent arrangement is over. I'm done being the name on the loan that nobody is allowed to mention. My father started to nod, eager, but I kept going. If I'm taking the risk, I'm on the deed. The farm gets restructured legally so that I'm a co-owner of record. Not a secret guarantor. A partner in writing, with my name where everyone can see it. Brooke made a strangled sound. You can't just... I can't, actually, I said not unkindly. That's rather the point. The bank already considers me the responsible party. The lawyers will make it official. I turned to my father. And there's one more condition. And this one isn't negotiable. I looked down at Lily, who had stopped crying, and was watching me with something like wonder. You will never speak to my daughter the way you did tonight again. Not ever. The first time you make that child feel like she's less than anyone at this table I walk. And I take my signature with me. And you can explain to the bank why. The room was silent. My father's eyes were wet. And if any of you ever tell her she's an embarrassment, Or that her mother is," I said, my voice finally catching just slightly, just once. "You'll find out the embarrassment was the only thing standing between all of you and ruin the whole time." I let that land. Then I crouched down to Lily's level and I zipped her coat up the last inch, and I said loud enough for all of them to hear, "Come on, sweetheart. We're going home tonight. We'll talk about the trees in the morning." And I stood up to leave. My father stopped me at the door, not with anger this time. He stood there, deflated, an old man in a cardigan who just watched his whole self-image come apart on Christmas night. And he said quietly, "Why didn't you ever tell anyone? 2 years. Why'd you let me take the credit?" It was, I think, the most honest question he'd ever asked me. I considered lying, saying something kind, but I was done managing his feelings. "Because I thought protecting your pride was the same as being loved," I said. "I thought if I carried enough, quietly enough, you'd finally decide I was worth keeping." I shook my head. "But you don't earn a place in a family by paying for it. I had to watch you throw my daughter into the snow to finally understand that." He didn't have anything to say. There wasn't anything to say. Mark stood up from the table then and crossed the room. And for a second, I tensed, but he just stopped in front of me and looked at me with red eyes. "You saved this place," he said. 2 years ago. You saved it. And I'm the one who said no. And I let you take the risk I wouldn't, and I never said a word. I'm sorry, Annie, for whatever that's worth." It wasn't worth much, but it was more than anyone else in that room had managed, and I could see it cost him something real to say it. So I nodded. "Take care of your wife's expectations, Mark," I said. "They just changed." And then I took my daughter's hand, and we walked out the door my father had thrown open to be rid of us, into the clean, cold snow. And we did not look back. In the car, Lily was quiet for a long time, watching the lit-up trees slide past as we drove down the lane. I was bracing for the questions, the ones I didn't know how to answer. Finally, she said, "Mommy, is Grandpa mad at us?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, without putting any of it on her small shoulders. "Grandpa's mad at himself," I said. "Sometimes grown-ups are unkind and then they feel bad, and they don't know what to do with the bad feeling, so they act even unkinder. That's not about you. You didn't do anything wrong tonight. You were perfect." She thought about that. "You weren't scared," she said. "When Grandpa yelled, everybody else was scared, but you weren't." I glanced at her in the mirror. "I was a little scared," I admitted. "But here's a secret. When somebody you love is scared, you can borrow their bravery for them until they find their own. That's what mommies do." She nodded very seriously, filing it away the way she filed everything. Then she said, "Can we still get a Christmas tree?" And I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in hours. "Baby," I said, "we own a Christmas tree farm now. We can have the best tree in the whole place." She grinned and pressed her face to the window. And I drove us home through the snow to our small apartment that nobody had ever helped me pay for, where the rent was always made and the lights were always on. And my daughter had never once, not for one single day, been treated like an embarrassment. Some homes are small. It doesn't mean they're not the warm ones. The lawyers took about 2 months. I signed the renewal in early January, after the restructuring was in writing, after my name went on the deed where everyone could see it. The farm was saved, the way it had been saved every year for 2 years. Except now it was no longer a secret, and no longer free. My father had to sit across a conference table from the daughter he'd thrown out and sign papers, making her his equal partner in the land his father planted. I don't think anything in his life ever humbled him more than that signature. We're not close now. I want to be honest about that, because these stories always want to bow on them, and real life is messier. But things are different. My father is careful with me in a way he never was. The carefulness of a man who knows exactly what he almost lost, and exactly who saved him from it. Brooke barely speaks to me, which is its own kind of peace. The inheritance she'd been counting on her whole life turned out to belong in large part to the sister she'd spent that life looking down on. My mother sends real cards now, and calls on Lily's birthday. And once last spring, she said, "I'm sorry," on the phone, fast and quiet like it hurt. And maybe it did. I told her I hurt her. I didn't tell her it was fixed, because it isn't. Not really. Some things you don't get to unbreak. But the one rule has held. Not one of them has said an unkind word to Lily since. They know what it costs now. And every December, Lily and I drive out to the farm. And she cuts down the best tree on the lot with her own 2 hands from the land her great-grandfather planted. The land a quiet letter said belonged to the one who loved it more than being right. Pop knew. He always knew. He just trusted me to find out. You can carry people who never once carried you for years in silence and call it love, but the day they hurt your child to feel bigger, you're finally allowed to set the whole weight down and pick back up only the few things and the few people that were ever truly worth holding. If your family ever called you their embarrassment, take a quiet look at who's really holding the roof up. The front door thrown open on Christmas night. The renewal I almost didn't sign. The letter from the one man who ever saw me clearly. Hold your line, protect your kids, and stop paying for a seat at a table that was never truly yours. So, tell me what you think in the comments below. Have you ever faced something like this? What's that one boundary you refuse to let anyone cross when it comes to protecting your kids? I really want to know. And if this story reached you, please share it and hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. Thanks for listening.